Speak.
Good morning again, everybody. Our main speaker today is Tim Calkins of Reston, Virginia. His father worked for the U.S. State Department, and when Tim was growing up around the world, he gardened in Tunisia, Vietnam, Benin, which is in West Africa, and Cameroon, and he lived in additional countries as well. He graduated from Shepherd University, which is in West Virginia, and spent his career working with the U.S. Geological Survey. For the past 30 years, Tim has gardened in suburban Northern Virginia and has developed a love for many plants, particularly the Amaryllidaceae family. He is a member of the Potomac Valley chapter of NARGS.
Yeah.
And I guess, Tim, you're missing Panietti speaking this weekend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or he's missing me.
Yeah.
That's true.
And he's also the moderator online on the Facebook group called Snowdrops and American Gardeners. He is here today with his wife, Melissa Courtney. Is Melissa? Yes, hi, Melissa. And will speak on the topic of bulbs from big to large, Love of Amaryllids. Tim, please welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your kind welcome. I've never been to Raleigh other than through the airport before this, but I have felt a connection. I have a few friends who live here, both in friends in real life and friends on the internet, and also through Raleigh's association with Elizabeth Lawrence, whose writings have shaped the kind of gardener that I aspire to be, and who inspires me to try to grow plants for all seasons. So like many of you, I'm a plant enthusiast, and I grow as many as I can, but when I take inventory of my garden, I find that I have a significant number of amaryllids. That's a very big family. There's 71 or 73 genera, depending on your source. And I only grow a few plants from less than 25% of those genera. So I am far from an expert. I'm just an enthusiast. But I am pretty enthusiastic about it. Today I'm going to talk about those that I tend to grow more of than others. Acis and Leucojum, Lycoris, a few Narcissus, Galanthus, and Zephyranthes. So from Acis to Zephyranthes, it's Amaryllids A to Z, but with an awful lot of gaps. So a little bit of context for where I garden. On the left is an overview of a typical 1980s Northern Virginia suburban lot. It's about 13,000 square feet. That was bare when we moved in and is pretty heavily planted now. It used to be sunny. It's now pretty much enclosed by the neighbors' trees, which, bless their hearts, are mostly silver maples. The elevation is around 390 feet, so it's not terribly high. We are close to the fall line at Great Falls, Virginia, but still in the Piedmont. The only significant drawback from a gardening perspective is the soil profile. And that was my Facebook profile picture for a number of years. And I don't normally dig that deeply when planting because it was no fun, but I was digging out a bog garden at the time. It was a great opportunity to show what a high shrink swell clay soil with a marl topsoil layer looks like. As a consequence, most of what I grow I have to put in raised beds or heavily amended soil because in the winter and the spring, which is mainly the only time that it is wet, it stays wet forever. And bad drainage kills lots of bulbs, which I've found to my sorrow over the years. So first I want to talk about something that is blooming right now, something that I imagine many of you have in your gardens, and that's Acis, specifically Acis autumnalis. Now, as we recall our Greek mythology, maybe from Ovid, maybe from Handel's operetta, Acis was the son of Faunus. He was a mortal, but in love with an immortal, the nymph Galatea, which, by the way, is the name of a very nice snowdrop that Jerry will be auctioning later on. In any case, unfortunately for Acis, the Cyclops Polyphemus, the same one that Ulysses dealt with in a different story, was also in love with the same Galatea. And when he encountered them, in his anger, he picked up a boulder from Mount Etna, threw it at Acis, and killed him. So I would argue that this sort of sad story of passion, of beauty, and of the use of heavy stone makes a pretty good rock gardening connection for Acis. So these are plants of the drier areas of the Western Mediterranean all the way around to North Africa. They're quite small. It takes a lot of them to make any real garden impression. In my garden, they start blooming as early as late June if we've had enough rain. They must bloom in the autumn somewhere, given their name. And they will continue on into September and increasing in number. As I said, it takes quite a few to make any kind of impression, unless you put them in a prominent spot. You can certainly grow them in pots, that sort of thing. There is at least one cultivar that I'm aware of, the September snow, which is, excuse me, marginally larger, and that's by a fraction than the species. And as a consequence, looks a little bit whiter, particularly if you have a lot of them. But they're fun plants to grow. They multiply by seed very readily, and also by offsets. There's another fall blooming Acis, Acis valentina, which is significantly larger. Still, I mean, this is a short plant. It's going to be under a foot, but the flower is about the size of a quarter, which compared to autumnalis is gigantic. It has 2 or 3 blooms per scape, whereas Acis often has the autumnalis only has 2. It is not a fast multiplier, at least it has not been for me. I've gotten maybe 1 offset in 4 years, so pretty slow rate, but it's a lovely plant, not particularly easy to find. And that's, of course, the problem with a lot of the really desirable bulbs. They're hard to get. This grows in the same general geographic area in its native environment. The bulbs are larger. They're about 1 inch in diameter compared to maybe BB size for autumnalis. And to my surprise, they have, kind of in growth anyway, a rather long neck and grow much deeper than I expected. 4 to 6 inches, naturally, it's not uncommon. So there are, Acis, as I said, are small plants. Thank you very much. And it helps to have something to go with them. Some combinations that I've found kind of successful are on the same scale, so they don't overwhelm it, are the Prosperos. There are about a dozen species. I don't have a dozen, I have 1. But I do have some geographic variants, and the variation is pretty slight, as you can see. These are also Western Mediterranean plants. They do well in a dry environment. They grow 4 to 8 inches tall. Multiple scapes from the bulbs. They multiply fairly rapidly. A similar plant, the Bernardia japonica, I have two infinitesimally different. One that was sold as Numidica, but I think is probably not, because most things that you see as Numidica in the trade really are just the Japonicas. These used to be classed as Psiloides. They are more floriferous. There's more flowers on the stalk, they're closer together. They seem to send up more stalks. And they're a good deal leafier, but again, not a large plant. 8 inches, maybe a foot if it's in the shade. And of course, some of the smaller colchicums are also nice combinations. I also grow Acis tingitana. This is a spring bloomer. For me in Northern Virginia, zone 7A, this will bloom around the 3rd week of March. It's the seed pod that you can see on the left there is from a snowdrop, so you can get some idea of the scale of these plants. It's bigger than autumnalis, smaller than a lot of things. But a nice enough little flower. And there are other Acis species. There's Ionica, which I saw blooming yesterday, the last vestiges of it at Juniper Level Botanic Garden. There's a Roseus, which is a pink form, which I'd love to find if anyone has it. And a couple others. But again, most of these you'll find from sellers in the UK. John Lonsdale in Edgewood Gardens in Exton, Pennsylvania, offers a few of them as well occasionally. So I'll move on to another plant in the same family, Leucojum. Well, same family. Acis and Leucojum used to be grouped together. They've been broken out, and it goes back and forth depending on how taxonomists are viewing things. This is a plant that should be familiar to most people. It's a great garden plant. I don't know so much a rock garden unless your rock garden was quite a big scale, since these things are comparable to main season daffodils, the large tulips, that sort of thing. Enjoys wetter conditions, will do better in the shade than the Acis species. It's a nice garden plant. I wouldn't want to be without it. But I particularly like the Leucojum vernum, which is one that blooms earlier by about 3 to 4 weeks, depending on your garden situation. It typically, the type species has 1 flower per scape. It's a fairly large flower, certainly bigger than Leucojum estivum. There are variants. There's one called Wagneri that is a couple weeks earlier. It is a little bit more vigorous. Will often have 2 flowers per scape. There's a good deal of variation in the blotches on the tepals. In the European market, there's quite a bit, and you really wish you could find some of those over here. The quote from Elizabeth Lawrence is from an article she wrote in 1943. And sadly, the situation hasn't changed that much. There are a few sources, but this is a bulb that dries out very rapidly in storage. And consequently, when you find it, it's somebody selling it in the green. And if you have a friend that has a big patch, that's the best way. There are some variants as well that are yellow to a bright chartreuse. The variant Carpaticum, you can see the best place that I'm aware of to see these is at Winterthur in Delaware on the March Bank, and it is just gorgeous and quite a bit of variation, and a lot of Carpaticum in with the normal vernum. One that's available in the US and hardly at all in Europe is Gertrude Wister, which came from the Wister Garden at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. And that is for sale commercially in the States. Only by about 2 people, but you can't find it. So I want to move from spring bloomers for a moment to others that you are no doubt familiar with as you're next to the mothership for licorice, juniper level. And that is the whole genus of licorice. It dates to, as a genus, to about 1820 when William Herbert, a name to remember, reclassified what was then known as Amaryllis radiata as Licorice radiata. A plant that I'm sure you all know was introduced as the red spider lily into the United States right here in North Carolina. And probably the reason I see it in so many different places around here. It's a lovely plant. The name honors a beautiful, famous Roman actress and courtesan whose name was Volumnia Ceteris. She was known for her relationship with Mark Antony and Brutus, the same Brutus who got all stabby later on with Julius Caesar. So why don't we call these things Ceteris, since that was her name? Well, one of her earlier lovers, a man named Gaius Cornelius Gallus, was a poet and wrote the first 4 books of Roman love poetry, almost none of which survives. But one of the surviving fragments translates something along the lines of, "Sad for you, Lycoris, because of your bad behavior," which is, in fact, how Lycoris can treat some of us in the garden sometimes. But all of this classical Roman stuff is kind of a red herring, because these are not Mediterranean plants. These are from China, from Korea, from Japan. In Japan, the name for the Lycoris radiata is Higanbana, which translates roughly to flower of the equinox, about when it blooms. And in China, one of the names is Dianhua, which is flower of the other shore, meaning a flower related to the afterlife as part of their cultural belief system. And that brings us back to resurrection lily, one of our common names for it. So in any case, I didn't know any of this when I was starting out. The only thing that I knew about as Lycoris was naked ladies and surprise lilies. And it was that one up top on the left, the hybrid squamigera. Not the most lovely name, perhaps, on the tongue, but it is a lovely flower. And it, for me, comes up rather unexpectedly every year. I know it's coming, but you just don't see them until they're there. In August, and it's pleasant enough for the short period that it blooms. And the second surprise it offers is the huge volume of leaves that it produces in the spring, swamping everything that grows next to it. So that used to be the first and only for me. And then I discovered there were others, and I've not looked back since. I just fell in love with these plants. So the earliest bloomer is the sanguinea. It's a lovely orange. It's a short plant, 18 inches or so. Blooms the same time as Cleftra alnifolia, the summer sweet, and they make a nice pairing together. And it's followed shortly by the species longituba. And then followed very quickly by a number of other things. The lovely little Momazona, which is a sanguinea cross with Springer, I believe. Fiery cloud, the peppermint lily, the cross incarnata. And then the real rush starts. A number of rosias, that is a radiata Springeri cross, and you can see characteristic blue tips in the leaves, indicating the springerai heritage. Flaming dragon also goes by the Japanese name of Satsum Hiryu. Is just a wonderful, bright, striking plant. But they're all really very nice. And then you get a whole bunch of others. Roman holiday. I don't know the parentage of that. I haven't been able to figure it out yet, although I do know it has winter leaves. Jalisa, you can see some springerai in that. The species chinensis, which will just light up a garden. I'm too far north to grow the one that looks very like that, the aurea, but that's a lovely one as well. There are any number of springerai selections. There are early bloomers, mid bloomers, late bloomers, and they're all really pretty nice. And I wouldn't have thought, in terms of combinations, that if you crossed a springerai with a chinensis, you would get something like Hazuki Moon. But that, in fact, is something, I think that's one from Komoria Nursery in Japan, also sold by Plant Delights. It's a lovely plant. And speaking of combinations, there's almost no mistake you can make with these, although Elizabeth Lawrence did warn, don't plant radiata with your purple colchicum, it's going to look horrible. Well, that was her opinion, but her opinion is one to be valued. So these are some nice associations in the garden. And here's a few more. Of course, they combine with rudbeckia, things that bloom around the same time. Little bright radiata, traditional Caldwell's original. And later in August, strawberry lemonade, a nice one because it starts out pale yellow and then gets these lovely pink overtones as it ages. 4th of July blooms for me in August, but I still like it. Red Hot Lover is a hybrid that's 2 parts radiata. You can see that from the color, but it just really shines in the garden. And then there are a bunch of yellows of all sorts. These are fairly tall plants. It's growing in shade under a cornice dogwood tree. So that maybe lengthens them a little bit. They show up well. I mentioned color changers. It's a big thing in the snowdrop world, and I'll talk about a few of those. And also with zephyranthes. And there are some lycoris that do it as well. This is one of them, apple blossom. It starts out almost a pure white and then gets lovely pink overtones and almost dark red as it starts to go over. And the double radiata, Benikujiaku, glorious in its own when it first comes out. And I'm not sure what causes this effect as it ages. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, that sun scalding, if that's what it is just spectacular. Here are 2 that look like they might be the same. They're actually crosses of different species. The one on the right, the Eden's Choice, is an albiflora cross, and I think that's the type that Elizabeth Lawrence spoke of when she wrote of white radiata or the white spider lily. True radiatas, of course, are red. That's another albiflora, but clearly has much more radiata influence in its pink color. And another Japanese, it looks a lot like Flaming Dragon. The name translates for this one to fire basket, roughly. And it's about 10 days later in bloom period. Otherwise, very similar. And you can see the springerai heritage in bud. It's really spectacular. And then the season ends for me with the double radiata at the beginning of September, Harvest Moon about the middle of September, and a late radiata coming up towards the end of the month. So that's 2 months of color and show just from a relatively small number of cultivars. I say that because I was at juniper level yesterday and saw what a big number of cultivars looks like, and I want to have them all. Another obvious source of summer color are the zephyranthes. And the name comes from William Herbert, naming it for the Greek personification of the west wind, Zephyrus. Again, these are not Mediterranean plants, however, they're North and South American plants. So I don't know why not wind lilies from his name, but they respond to rain more than they do to wind. And in the Mediterranean, the western winds in winter often brought the rain. So I guess that's the connection he was making. So, and in the spirit of Elizabeth Lawrence's grandmother, growing things in pots, I grow most of mine in pots, not because this is a necessary way to grow them, except in my circumstances. I have very poor draining soil. These don't like to be wet in the winter. I do have some tender species, although most of what I grow is comparable to what you could grow outside here. Drummondii, citrina, the grandifloras, those hybrids like La Buffarosia, those will all do great in the ground. They'll overwinter fine. I've even overwintered Adamasca in my bog garden. But I've given over all the good space to snowdrops and other things, but I didn't want to be without these. So it's debatable whether I have a collection of rain lilies or a collection of pots. As Melissa points out to me fairly often. And the other half is on the other side of the driveway. So you don't need a lot of fancy hybrids to get some great color and a good show from rain lilies. These are some of the more commonly available species. These all grow in my garden or in pots. Drummondii and citrina have seeded themselves around, so have others. That grandiflora was the first that I grew. It came from a packet of bulbs. It was a fundraiser one of my sons was doing for junior high. It grew in the same pot for 15 years until it broke the pot. And, it's just a good tour. And there's some more species. The Catherinae, the rubra, there's a lutea, which is a yellow version of those two. Primulina, which also grows very well. And then finishing up the species that I grow, a couple new acquisitions from last year. And then on to Hibranthus, named by, you guessed it, William Herbert, from the Greek word for gentle or graceful. There are about 30 species of Hibranthus. I don't have anywhere near that many, but I do have some of the larger blooms and some of the smaller ones. Brachyandrus, a South American plant with a lovely marine base to the pink apex. That one, along with Robustus, are the two parents of the Florii hybrid. There's a green-based version, the one that I'm showing there. There's also a marine-based version of Florii, named, I believe, for Walter Florey, who was, before he became the chair of biology at Wake Forest, was the director of the Blandy Experimental Farm in my own state of Virginia, which is now the state arboretum at Blandy. So a little connection there too. I have what I purchased in hope more than in faith, a blue hibranthus. There is such a thing. There is a hibranthus caeruleus. I'm pretty sure I don't have it, but I do have this small plant, second from the left there, that is bluish in the way that a Leucora springeri of the lesser sort might be if you look at it right. But it's definitely not the same as some others. I think it might be a variety of Tubispathus, which are some of the smaller blooms, the Texensis, which seeds prolifically everywhere, Roseus, which is a nice, and you can see that they're related, but it's a different plant. Robustus, you know, as you'd expect from the name, very vigorous, nice repeat blooms, has a lot of different forms, showing one there that on the left that I got from a nursery in Florida, the other that I picked up at Montrose 6 years or so ago. And then just a bit of a range of cultivars that you can get. This is a group of pinks. They all grow really well. They're, for the most part, good repeat bloomers. I particularly like rose-colored glasses, lily pies. Heartthrob has a color you just can't beat. And then we have whites. You'll notice I define white pretty loosely. There's obviously some pink in there, and a little yellowish cream. Great variety of shades. There are yellows. A few of them look pretty much like each other. There's a lot on the market. And if I put Yellow Fever, Ajax, Twinkle, and Primulina all in one pot and took away the labels, it would take quite some effort to figure out what it was that you had and sort it back out. But they're all good bloomers. They grow really well, and some of them are strikingly different. There are reds, of course. Again, a range from a real cherry red to almost a scarlet or orange color. I think it's a little unfair to call a rain lily a tulip, but somebody did. And it's a nice little flower, and it certainly is striking. If you look at it right, I can see where they got the name. Joy in particular, I would point out as just a beautiful, striking flower, and one that grows really well. It'll stand out in the group. And there are oranges of various shades, including one that showed up in my own garden. It didn't just show up. I sort of tried to do it. I was playing around and crossed Eastern Pearl with a grandiflora, first generation, a great big, sort of odd looking pink flower, and crossed that again with, I think it was Primulina, and came up with that little yellow centered orange plant. It's not spectacular, but you know, it's nice enough. And just an example of what you can do. These things grow pretty rapidly, you know, about 3 years from, at most, from seed to bloom, which for a bulb is not bad. There's some exciting to me anyway, hybridization going on. And if you judge it just from Facebook groups, it seems to be particularly in Thailand, in India, and in Mexico. And some of these are making it to the United States. And there's a charm to the single flowers. They're nice. There's a sort of purity to them. But some of the doubles are pretty cool as well. You'll notice that there's a range of symmetry and even degree of doubleness. In some cases, that's just the way the cultivar turned out. In other cases, it might be the maturity of the bulb. I've noticed that the ones that come up from the first year planting are often almost single, and then as they age and mature, get a little bit bigger, they increase, which is not unusual either. So you have these pinks. There's the one white one, oddly named Bunny Beep. But there are some pretty nice other colors as well. Particularly striking, I think, Lu Hao Ning, Sud Tirak, which there is one sitting over there for the auction, in fact. And I can tell you, because I asked him yesterday, that's one Tony Avent doesn't have. And I mentioned crossing the grandifloras with other things. It's not truly a double, but you can perhaps see that the result of that cross of Eastern Pearl with grandiflora, you get big flowers with 8 petals, sometimes 8 stamens, 7. They're stable. They reproduce year to year in that pattern. And it does seem like something that might be fun to play with in the future. So, a jump into narcissus. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about every narcissus there is. We don't have that long. But I do want to talk about the narcissus season, particularly with miniatures, which I've grown particularly fond of in the past few years. And with the right range of cultivars, it's like anything else. You can get close to 6 months of bloom over time. For me, starting in October with Tazetas, which are not truly miniatures at all. They're small flowers, but pretty big plants. One on the left is from the Eastern Mediterranean, Syria, Jordan, raised that one from seed. It's currently growing in a cold frame. These probably do much better in your gardens than they do up in Northern Virginia. But Pachybolus does grow outside. It'll bloom in November, continue into December if we don't have too many hard freezes, and then it gets knocked back pretty hard, but comes back year to year. Autumn Jewel is something that I'm growing in a cold frame. This is a Japanese selection. Probably not a valid name since that particular name is registered to a white Cantabricus from New Zealand. So a different plant, but still a lovely little flower with a nice scent. Also from Japan is White Crusher. And this is from the same nursery, by the way, that breeds Lycoris. So they're doing some interesting things. There's a Narcissus minor selection, an old traditional Cedric Morris, which will do fine in the outdoor garden, blooming some years by Christmas, most years by New Year's for sure. Its only drawback, because it's really cute, is that it grows so very, very slowly. It just takes forever to build anything up. Much faster are the Bulbicodium. These are shown growing in a cold frame because I wasn't sure how hardy they were, and I only had a few bulbs to start. These are from a dryad nursery in the UK. Anne Wright is one of the world's premier breeders of miniature snowdrops. She has some spectacular things. I'd encourage you to look up Dryad Nursery website and take a look at their online catalog. We may not be able to get them for a little while, but I did get a few in under the wire. Moon Group V is the white one. L is the yellow one. There's a dozen bulbs of each here for the auction. Malinki, I'm almost ashamed to say I bought just for the name. because it was a term my Canadian grandmother used. It's a Scots-Irish term for skinny. And it is a skinny little cyclamineous bloom. The Romulii bifanis from Rift Mountains in Morocco. That grows, I believe, outdoors at juniper level. Mine, I wanted to build it up before I tried it outside, so it's still in a cold frame. The Misto is another one from Ann Wright, a number of species. The old reliable tete-a-tete, Rupicula, Galantaquilla group, which is an Irish cross of some Spanish miniatures by Brian Duncan. It does great in a trough garden, and it is hardly taller than a snowdrop, so they're a nice thing to combine together. The old traditional mite, first bulbicodium that blooms for me outdoors, early bird. Rip Van Winkle is also a Narcissus minor, but it doesn't look much like Cedric Morris, but it's a nice little plant. A whole bunch of bulbicodiums coming on by early March. The Jonquillas by mid-March. Medway Gold is commercially available from a number of sources. And it's just an adorable little plant. Those blooms are hardly bigger than a fingernail. Put that on a plant table and it just goes like hotcakes for some reason, if it's in bloom. And then winding up the season for me, Narcissus dubius, another in the Tazetta group. Just a charming little flower. Later on, a surprising bush of leaves comes out, but at the time of bloom, not so many. The wonderfully named Harold Kupowitz selection, Itsy Bitsy Splitsy, which does indeed have a split corolla. Edged in Gold, another American selection from Steve Viniski. It's a taller plant. It's in the trade. You can find that, and I've never seen anything quite like it. It really stands out. Pixie Sister has been around for decades, but it's a charming plant. And then the last one for me is Wilconii. There are later plants, the pheasant's eye, the poet's narcissus, those sorts of things, but in the miniatures, that's pretty much it. And just an example of these growing in a trough garden. They've been in there for about 3 years. It's a very dry environment. They probably multiply a little better if it were damper, but it's a fun combination to try. And then I'd like to finish up with a quick run through some snowdrops, if I could. So, you mentioned snowdrops to a lot of people who are not fans. They don't know what you're talking about, or they think it might be leucogium, or they'll say, oh yeah, those little white things. And that's true. They are small white flowers, and they, whether they're the ones commonly seen in the trade, Wessii, nivalis, Voronoi, they have the same general pattern, white outers, shorter white inners with 1 or 2 green marks, and they're pleasant plants, but people don't get excited about them the way I do. So I'll inflict a little bit of that upon you, because there's a lot more to these. In terms of availability, we do live in a golden age for snowdrops, and they grow great in the mid-Atlantic environment, better than in most parts of the country. And with the right selection, not unlike the narcissus, you can have snowdrops over a period of 6 months. So there are doubles, like blueberry tart. There are 4x4s and 6x6s, like Godfrey Owen, which is just a spectacular plant, whether you're looking at it from the bottom or the top. There are, of course, any number of yellows. There are poculiforms, which is just a shape variant. It's from the Latin poculum, meaning cup. And essentially what's happened with these is they are all outers. So whatever the outer pattern is, all 6 of those tepals are going to be the same. They can be perfect. This one is close in the sense of they're the same length, or imperfect, in which there's some variation between what was the inner is a little bit shorter. And you have the inverse poculiforms, which are all inners. There are color changers in snowdrops, as there are in other plants. This one, the apical mark there on the sinus, starts out a dark green, and it changes as the plant ages. Typically, the ovary receptacle stays green. Certainly does in this cultivar. And then there are virescents, which are washed all over with green, like green mile, which is a Nivalis. So I'll go through just very quickly sort of the sequence of bloom. For me, it starts off with the Reginae Olgae, Queen Olga's snowdrop. Olga was the Queen of Greece, which is where these originate from at the time that the British began really specializing in snowdrops. And this species was given her name. Also, early in October are some of the Bursanus. This is a relatively recently discovered species dating back to only about 2014. I mean, they've been around a lot longer, but people didn't become aware of them. And I don't think it was published until 2019. But in that relatively short period, there's been a lot of seed collection. There are named cultivars available already because snowdrop people are pretty fanatical. You get the nearly all white Blonde de Chine. Some early Wessii, another species from Turkey, the Peshmenii. And there's a picture of one of my favorites because I had the privilege of naming it. I didn't originate it. It came from seed collected by Tom Mitchell in Greece, in the Tagatos Mountains. It was raised by John Lonsdale in Pennsylvania, but when it did so well in my garden, I was one of the early purchasers. John agreed with me that I could name it. I wanted to name it for Elizabeth Lawrence, who's been so inspirational to me in the gardening world. It doesn't show well in this picture, but there are nice green blotches on the outers of this particular plant. And in my garden, it multiplies extremely rapidly. It's a really good grower.
And Tim, you might mention you have that plant here for all.
There are 2 of them for sale.
Elizabeth Lawrence.
So, in Novembers are typically mild in my climate. And much of what was blooming in October is going to continue into November, be joined by some of these. Get some variation in shapes. You can see Barnes does not look like Hoggett's Narrow. You know, they're both Elwesii, but different forms. There's a Reginae Olgae poculiform, autumn snow. It's a little irregular, but it makes a nice contrast to other plants around it. Yet another species, that nice green tip Solicicus. This is when Montrose Elwesii bloomed for me. Some that I acquired a few years back. And more variation in Bursanus. And that one with a solid green inner mark. And yet again in November, a whole range of things. Lovely green tips on that German selection, Frank Lebsa. Elwesii with green stripes. Reggie Olgay with green blotches. Another one from Hoggett's, which is the name of a garden in England, with a much rounder shape as opposed to narrow. One of the earliest fluorescents, York Minster. One of the things that charms me about snowdrops is every plant's got a story. And I'll inflict one upon you. The story behind Remember is that it celebrates Guy Fawkes Day. And it blooms typically in England, less so in my garden, on November 5th, which is in fact the anniversary of the gunpowder plot to blow up Parliament. And there's an old rhyme, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. And hence the name of this plant. In December, you get a number of holiday-styled cultivars. There's Gabriel, the angel of the Annunciation. And when you have a warm day, the outers will rise and are purported to resemble the wings of an angel. Some marketing, if nothing else, but it's fun. Frinton Advent from Frinton-on-Sea. The Plicatus, which is yet another species, 3 ships after the Christmas Carol. I saw 3 ships on Christmas Day. And it does actually bloom for me occasionally on Christmas Day or even a little before. There's an American selection, Xmas, which was, I believe that was found in the Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C., and then later developed by some Pennsylvania growers. The earliest double for me, Farrington double. A couple more American selections, also from Pennsylvania. Standing Tall and Potter's Prelude. There aren't that many American selected plants, so I'm trying to acquire as many of them as I can. January, February, coldest part of the year. Doesn't bother these plants, they're perfectly hardy. French term for snowdrops is perce-neige, piercing snow, and they certainly do that. Mrs. McNamara is a classic. It's named after Dylan Thomas's mother-in-law, who was a famous person in her own right. Rod Martin Regulus is a very nice, large flowered Elwesii. Blooms for me in January. There are 6 of them, so almost everybody can go home with one. A double, Lady Beatrix Stanley. Eleanor Grace, another American selection, that one from John Lonsdale, and it's a different species yet again. That's a gracilis, which has a characteristic twist to the leaves of the plant. There's some fun names like fly fishing, because it has a very long pedicel that someone thought resembled a fishing rod. There's one, which I wish I could get, with an even longer pedicel. It's called deep sea fishing. And then just as there are earlier and later blooming Elwesii, there are earlier and later blooming Reggie Olgay, so-called Vernalis. This is a particularly nice one with a sort of shepherd's crook shape. Perhaps an odd name, magnetic pedicel. But the idea was from the old fishing game with magnets that children used to play. And then moving on into February, a Canadian selection, Rosemary Burnham. That was a plant that survived through the goodness of gardeners. It was sent to England and then vanished in Canada and was returned back to the Pacific Northwest from a garden in England and is now available. Most of these are fairly easy to grow. That one, to use the British term, is miffy. It took me 3 tries. I killed it really dead twice until I found a spot that worked, and it, to my surprise, likes a really, really dry location, at least in my garden. Yet another species, there are about 20, 23, depending on how you break things out. Voronoi, they tend to bloom a little bit later than the first part of February. This one, another from John Lonsdale, is Eleanor's early. And yes, the exclamation mark is part of the name. Eleanor, in case you haven't figured out, is John's wife. There are yellows, a great many of them, like Bill Clark or Dryad Gold Sovereign. Just as she breeds wonderful miniature narcissus, Anne Wright breeds wonderful snowdrops, very few of which have made it to the U.S. Example of a color changer, Uli's Gift, another one where the center mark starts off green and then turns a bright yellow. There's a Nivalis that's a virescent, different one called Green Tear. That one happens to produce a 4x4 as well occasionally. I'm not yet sure if it's stable, but that would be exciting. Yet another species, Ketzkavellii, towards the end of February. And then rounding things out in March and all the way through the month, a poculiform Nivalis Del Star, green-tipped, one of the loveliest doubles that I think there is. Esther Merton is just a perfect little cabbage of repeating pattern. Doubles are great because they tend to be sterile. They may produce some pollen. You can breed from a number of them if you're so inclined. But generally speaking, they do not set seed. And you can see that the receptacle in the back of that Esther Merton, it's just looks like a stem. Nothing's going to happen there. But as a consequence, they last twice as long. Lady Elphinstone, one of the few yellow doubles. Midas, another one which is up for auction. This was found at the English nursery Avon Bulbs, now sadly defunct. And its finder, Allen Street, discovered it growing, it was just a random open pollinated plant. It is both a color changer and a poculiform, which is not a common combination. And he immediately put a pot over it because they had a bunch of people who were coming to go through the garden, and he didn't want them to see it before he was ready to release it and be sure what it was. And when it did go on the market in 2015, I believe it was, single bulb sold for 100 British pounds. So, the British, of course, are even crazier about these plants than some of us Americans. The last species to bloom for me, Krasnovii, these are snowmelt plants. They grow high up above the tree line. They emerge typically just as the snow melts. This is not particularly easy to keep alive in my environment. It's situated in deep shade. I have it planted by a water barrel so I can keep its roots moist all summer long because they do get that continuing trickle from melting snow coming down from above. And I'm not sure if you can see in this particular view, it's distinct in that it has no sinus notch. It has the two little green marks that would typically be one or two there, but there is no notch. It makes it really stand out. It's a lovely form. Also no notch because it has no inners. It's just Helvesii white perfection. And an example of some of the wild variation you can get in some of the doubles. This is double charmer. There are others, spikies that are literally look just like some sort of brush pushing out. Some people love them, others hate them. They don't look much like the classic pure snowdrop, but incredible interest. So I'd submit to you that if you're not growing enough galanthus, and you're probably not, whether you want a fall blooming situation, if you want something that is a classic shape, something a little bit bizarre, there is a snowdrop for you. And there are any number of planting combinations. If you can get your asters to flop just right, it's a wonderful companion plant. If they don't flop right, you've buried your snowdrops. But certainly the autumn crocus, saffron crocus, up there with geranium starting to turn red. I think that's espresso cultivar, cyclamen, of course. Or whether you want a spring setting, they're wonderful with Aranthus malis, with the cloth of gold, some of the hardier heucheras. And if you have a lot of space, of course you can do this. Most of us aren't going to do anything that grand. That's one of the terraces at Montrose, of course, from about 6 years ago, and I'm sure it's even grander now. So perhaps we can't achieve that, but all of us could achieve something. So thank you. So we can now take any questions if you have any, and if not, I'll cede the floor.
Tim, could you repeat the question after?
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
All those pots that you had along your driveway, what do you do with them in the winter?
Of all the pots that I have on the driveway, what do I do with them in the winter? And the answer is they all go into the garage under lights. I try to keep them growing as long as I can in the season. It's not necessary to do that. As I said, most of them would be hardy, but they wouldn't be hardy in a pot sitting outside.
Right.
If you could grow them in the ground, I'd certainly encourage you to do that. It's a lot less work. But if you don't have the space, if all you've got is a balcony, you can still grow those plants and they'll do quite well. Yes?
What's the substrate you're using in all the pots? Does it vary?
What's the substrate that I use in the pots, and does it vary? It's essentially commercial gardening mix. Occasionally, for things that are like particular dry environments, I'll add extra perlite. I do use ground bark fines to ensure better drainage. That's the worst enemy of any of these plants, is being wet when they're dormant. They just don't like it. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.